Hey, it's Coach Taylor from SmarterTeamTraining.com. I got a guy on the phone here named Dave Tenney with the Seattle Sounders of the MLS that we've been trying to connect for a long time. We've actually ran into each other in an airport, and I just happened to see him, and I said, hey, man, we got to get this thing done. So just to go through that process, if you want to connect with people, if you want to reach out to people and ask questions about just things that are going on in their life as far as the profession, stay persistent. You don't have to be necessarily unprofessional, but every couple of weeks or a month or so, just send another email and just ask questions. The good ones will make time to give back to those that are willing to ask questions and just try to better themselves and even for that matter, try to better the experience for their athletes, their coaches, and their parents that they get a chance to work with. So, Coach Tenney, man, I'm looking forward to an outstanding conversation. You and I have had many going back in the day here, and I'm looking forward to this adding on to one of the other ones that it just led to an outstanding conversation, my man.
Well, thanks. No, thanks for having me on. Yeah, and the funny thing is, I think that meeting in the airport was over 2 years ago, after we advanced in the playoffs against Salt Lake. So it's been a long time. But yeah, I mean, you're exactly right. I mean, I think in our profession, and we get so many kind of requests and emails from younger coaches really trying to achieve things and learn things, and you know, quite honestly, it's hard to keep up with all of them, and I do actually appreciate when people, you know, kind of are persistent and continue to send emails, because, you know, we get so many per week that you can't answer all of them, and you still want to get to as many people as possible. So yeah, I would echo those same sentiments.
Dave, we were going to post your bio and how you got to where you are right now, my man, on the show. So not necessarily, this isn't a question about in 1995 we did X, but I want to know about the passionate person you are, and I know you have a ton of passion. You've gone above and beyond to go and find more information and make that a common practice for yourself wherever you go. I want to know what inspires you to become great, to try to learn more on a regular basis, and tell me a little bit about what you got going on now, my man.
I've clearly seen, I mean, I came into MLS, this is my 9th season in MLS, and you've definitely seen an evolution in the role of us as, you know, basically whatever you want to call them, as a strength conditioning coach, as a fitness coach, as a performance coach, performance manager, etc. And it's been exciting, I think, trying to help as much as I can drive that and drive how the profession within our sport is changing. And what really drives me is how that integration between the sports coach, strength conditioning staff, quantifying and kind of optimizing everything that happens between the weight room and what's going on in the field. Because I think a lot of times in a lot of settings, things happen in isolation. Sports coaches aren't really engaged or cognizant of what's going on in the weight room, and vice versa. What's going on the practice field isn't really taken into account sometimes by some strength coaching staff, sometimes based purely on time and obviously manpower. And obviously being in a setting like this and trying to integrate those things as effectively as possible to optimize the training of a group of athletes, I think is kind of what I'm most passionate about.
If we're talking soccer, and I'm talking to a soccer guy, one of the big questions is going to be fitness and the conditioning aspect of the game for men's or women's game. And I don't care if you're talking about the youth model, the high school, the college, the beyond college, the pro, even the weekend warriors, man. If you're playing soccer, you have to be fit. I mean, how important is conditioning for a soccer player? And then how do you suggest enhancing the conditioning levels of the participants of the game?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think the intriguing thing with soccer, because this is a discussion we have a lot, there's obviously within the culture of soccer, if you ask most strength conditioning professionals, and they'll say, well, you know, soccer guys, they don't like to lift. I can't get them in the weight room. I can't get them to lift heavy. They just want to run. Just want to do shuttles or whatever. It's clearly this mix of, you know, this metabolic requirement, at times highly aerobic, at other times highly anaerobic, as well as these, you know, speed and power needs as well. And clearly every athlete and every coach, I think, comes to the table really loving one part of that equation and probably not as much the other. And I think it's really important to look at each athlete's different. You're going to have some. I use the example for us of Chad Marshall, who was MLS Defender of the Year last year, who's 6'4" and between 215 and 220. That's not a very aerobic guy. Versus your 5'8", 150-pound center midfielders that are very, very aerobic and probably could have been middle distance runners if they would have gone that route when they were younger. So I think from the fitness perspective, how are you mixing those things? And even though we're grouping everything into a big group of soccer players, I think very quickly, the higher levels you go, I think very quickly positional differences do really play into effect, and the aerobic needs of a big central defender or a really fast twitch striker versus a wide midfielder, center midfielder, wide defender, they become different, subtly different, I think, really quickly. We've done, I think, we've kind of played with a lot in the last few years is kind of a, maximal aerobic speed type idea, and a lot of work at 15 seconds on, 15 seconds off, those types of shuttle type ideas. I think Dan Baker in Australia is actually bringing over a ton of the kind of the Australian ideas about maximal aerobic speed into the American market right now. So I think that obviously hits one kind of intensity domain, and maybe that's another way of looking at it within the sport of soccer. There's a whole lot of work being done at very, very different intensity domains, and that's where differs obviously from a American football type player, where it's very much an on-off type intensity domain. You're working 100% or you're resting. So our guys will cover roughly 10 to 12,000 meters a game. But if you break that up in all the different intensity domains, we'll have, the top guys are covering 1,500 meters at 5.0 to 5.5 meters per second, which is, a very decent jog and faster. And so training in those domains become fairly important. If you actually looked at how much they're doing at an absolute maximal sprint, it's not quite as much. It might be 5 to 10% of their total distance in a game, and then they're doing 5,000, 6,000 meters at kind of this sub-maximal intensity. So how do you optimize that? How do you make an athlete more efficient as they're going through all those different domains? And I think obviously with the said principle and that is training that, trying to replicate that in your training setting is going to bring about the this efficiency over time. The advantage for us over a lot of settings is we can actually measure all this. So last night we were looking at all of our physical data from the first game of the season, and we know the difference between someone who's covering 12,000 meters versus 9,500 meters, and metabolically those guys look like two really different athletes. So I think, kind of roundabout way, is there any real simple answer? I don't think there is. I think it's about how do you get the right volume of work in all those intensity domains, and then how are you going to do that? Are you going to do that off the field? Are you going to try to do that through small set of games? Are you, as a strength conditioning specialist, going to try to replicate some of those demands, maybe not within a team training setting, but something on the field that looks very similar? I think those are all the decisions you have to make.
You and I have talked at length about how a strength and conditioning coach can really make or break a season by the way they communicate on a daily basis with their coaches, their players, et cetera, the athletic training, sports medicine staff, et cetera. When you have a practice that's either extremely light for whatever reason or extremely hard for whatever reason, how do you go about approaching your aspect of it, whether it's the strength or the additional potential conditioning program or agility, what we do as you implied, performance manager, strength conditioning coaches, or whatever the title is. How does your program, or how have you built into your program a way to adapt to really help get the or maximize the results of your athletes?
Yeah, I mean, I think as again, the evolution of my role, and I think our role, because I think you are going to see this performance manager position more often within U.S. sports at the collegiate level and at the pro level. You're seeing it already. I think the first piece is what's within your program, your system, to quantify fatigue. Most likely in most sports, this is not all sports, but in most sports, it's your games that are your most fatiguing day of the week. And so I think it's incumbent upon all of us to actually measure that, and as you can do that through some subjective questionnaires. I mean, there's some schools that have now some HRV capability, whether it's a BioForce or an Omega Wave or iSleep, things like that, and really what you're trying to get is a snapshot of where the athletes are at. How fatigued are they? Who's able to tolerate the loads for that day? Who's able to, maybe it's a sport like basketball or baseball where, okay, maybe that particular game is not the heaviest load of the week, but now it's accumulated load. It's multiple games. It's travel plus games. And I think it's within our job responsibility to then bring together all that data on how fatigued athletes are, and then be able to paint a picture of the coaching staff as to who's tolerating those loads and who's not tolerating those loads. And then hopefully your coaching staff is bought into that. And it's kind of what we do here is then prescribe. Yeah, very rarely will I necessarily prescribe exercises for the coaching staff, on a daily basis. But it's more, okay, this group of athletes is not tolerated the previous game. So those are all wide players. You can choose exercises you want to do today, but my recommendation would be that we keep it a lower velocity day, maybe more change of direction, but let's do stuff on a little bit smaller field, and we're going to keep our velocities down. We might then go in the weight room, and that type of information is going to drive what happens in the weight room, or vice versa. Maybe you have a lot of center midfielders, central defenders that have some tight groins, some tight hip flexors, and okay, well, a lot of tight, small 3 against 3, 4 against 4 exercises today. That just might not be good for our group if our star center midfielders are a really important player. Let's go in a bigger field. Our center midfielders will touch the ball less. The wide players can get some higher velocity work, and then again we can maybe do focus more on posterior chain type work once we get into the weight room. But I think once you get in, again, the MLS season being an 11-month season is so long, with preseason and playoffs, it ends up being close to 11 months. That being able to quantify the stress and fatigue that happens within your group over a year is really critical, and I think that's what ends up kind of driving a lot of your programming and kind of your periodization, just out of necessity. We can't help if we've got a 5.5-hour flight back from Boston that leaves early, and then and maybe it was a tough game and we played on turf, and we show up the next day at the training facility and everyone's just beat up and fatigued. That type of information has to be in your periodization model of both what happens on the field as well as what happens in the weight room. So I think to me that's the starting point is how are the athletes tolerating everything most important to games in terms of the loading you're giving them over the course of the week.
I know in your role, and a lot of people may not realize how influential the strength conditioning, the performance manager is in the ML scenario. Most practices being, let's say, that 90-minute ballpark as far as the template goes before you take the field. The strength coach or the performance manager might be controlling the first 25 to 30 minutes of the practice. Can you do me a favor and just walk me through a little bit of that that dynamic warm-up, a little bit of that flexibility and mobility program, kind of helping the guys get ready for the high level of effort that's going to be expected in the back hour of practice. Can you tell me a little bit about how you approach that on a daily basis? Again, over a course of 11-month season, that's fairly insane, man. That's a very important aspect of a successful season.
It's a little bit different based on my role. Obviously, I was a soccer coach right when I finished playing soccer. And then actually worked as a youth soccer coach prior to moving in the fitness strength conditioning industry. So the coach allows me to also do the first exercise with the ball. So every training session we sit down, we talk about what the goals might be for the training. And that will drive what my first 25 to 30 minutes is. Typically, I'll do one exercise with the ball that will be geared towards what the rest of the training session will be. And then it's easy to kind of weave that around our dynamic warm-up and mobility stability work, which I think the players like and the players enjoy, because now it's not, okay, well, this coach is going to go for 20 minutes of something that's totally not sports related, sports specific at all, and then all of a sudden another group of coaches comes in and takes over. It's very much kind of a blending of easing your way into training, getting a little bit with the ball, getting the mobility stability work you need as part of the dynamic warm up, and then moving into the tactical exercises after they've done some technical work tied in within the dynamic warm up. So I mean, still typically, your first 10 to 12 minutes will be purely without a ball. And again, it's looking at while we're adding something in with the ball, is it going to be a linear speed day, a lateral speed day, a change of direction day, some low-level plyos, which you do on the field, along with that mobility stability work. You clearly see with soccer players, especially in our setting where a lot of soccer players in their late 20s and early 30s, of just the effect of playing soccer their whole life. And you get a lot of symptomatic hips, glutes that might work, they might not work. You get some typically your South Americans, Europeans that have not always embraced being in the weight room their career, and now you get them at early 30s, and you have an athlete that maybe isn't what we would consider strong in the weight room, and they have their issues based on that wear and tear. And so, clearly, if there's a mobility part of the training, there's a glute and core, activation part of it. And again, the good thing is we can weave that into the middle of what we're doing with some ball work, so it doesn't actually feel to the athletes like, okay, none of this is stuff that I'm really interested in. We can do a little bit of ball work, we can do some core stability, we can do a little bit more ball work, and then we can do some mobility work and some glute activation type stuff. And to me, that makes it a lot more palatable, I think, for our guys to kind of get into training. And again, being in Seattle, people might look at it and be like, well, you really need 25, 30 minutes before you're kicking a ball. But with these guys, hip flexors and adductors are like 4, 5, 6 months in. It's just not really comfortable to hit or strike a ball until everything is warm. And, we've done some of the hip mobility work, and and then as they work their way through it, I think they become more comfortable. And I'm trying typically not to do any sort of striking of long balls over distance until we're probably somewhere between 15 to 20 minutes in, because we've just found that especially older athletes, they just don't tolerate that, and they'll be symptomatic the next day or two.
I want to talk technology for a second, if you wouldn't mind. And I know you guys in the soccer world, it's probably pushing the GPS and the player assessment as far as what they're actually doing on the field, probably pretty far in front of a lot of other sports, and even outside of America. Europe has got an unbelievable amount of data, whether it's rugby or Australian football, soccer, that football, non-American football
Yep.
scenario.
Yep.
I mean, how has technology enhanced your program, your programming even, and what are you using to kind of stay ahead of the competition, if you wouldn't mind?
I think, the first part with the GPS, and we also have, most of the professional teams also have a camera tracking system that can track games, because in soccer we're still not able to wear technology in games. So we do a camera-based system for that. And I think the starting point is what are your athletes actually doing in the game? To me, I think, to prepare someone for where they need to go, you have to know, obviously, what are they actually doing in the games. So I think that's the first thing that happens. How much distance are they covering in these different, velocity domains? And what I think, there's kind of, I think you can either do it two ways. You can use the data to look at, okay, this is how we train, and these athletes are not tolerating, or they're thriving in our environment. So you can do it to look at the data and really try to sort out maybe who's struggling and who's not. And sometimes it's not always clear, because motivation becomes a big part of how much and how hard athletes are training sometimes in practice. So if numbers are up or numbers are down, you always have to ask yourself, okay, well, did this exercise just not work? Did these players not want to work hard, or were they not able to work hard? And those are two real big differences if it's a mental thing or if it's a physical thing. But I think, especially with GPS, being able then to translate it to your coaching staff. This is what our players are doing in the games, and therefore we need to train them like this. And again, subtly change the way your coaching staff might approach training. And I'll give you an example of that. A lot of coaches love, let's say, five against five small-sided games. It's intense. Players get a lot of touches. You might drive heart rates pretty high. There's a lot of reasons why coaches really love to use some 4 against 4 and 5 against 5 type games in training. But if you look at your GPS, there's very, very little high velocity work in those 5 against 5 games. And there's a whole lot more change of direction type load in those games than in the 11v11 game. So if I'm trying to prepare a team to play in a match, and we spend all of our time doing a warm-up and then a series of 5 against 5 games, and then we're going to do some shooting and finishing, I might not really physically be preparing my team to play at all, because that wide guy that has to cover 1,500 meters at a high velocity, well, he's not getting that during the week at all. And so I think the GPS and heart rate data kind of really fills us in on the actual mechanical demands, as well as kind of the internal metabolic demands of the athletes. And we've used that to really create our own kind of in-house metrics that has really helped drive some of our decisions in how we want to train our teams over the course of the week, and when we're going to use more smaller fields, and when we're going to use bigger fields, and certain tactical exercises that might overload certain positions without us always knowing that's what's happening. So I think to me, that's the biggest power of the technology and how it's changed our work in a day-to-day model.
I want to talk to you from the strength training side of working with soccer players. Are there any exercises that you should or you recommend either to avoid or encourage in your program?
The soccer players, the big thing to me is that they're stuck in this kind of hip flexion kind of lumbar extension type posture. And obviously, again, I think because we have this environment where they're overplaying in these 5-a-side type games, from the posterior chain standpoint, they're not getting enough. They're not getting, for us, just a really standard thing is just, a hex bar deadlift. I mean, hex bar deadlift, if I were to look at like our real critical lifts, in season. I mean, it's not really rocket science, but our really critical lifts in season, we're spending our time on X-bar deadlifts. We're doing some single leg kettlebell deadlifts. We're doing step-ups, kettlebell step-ups onto a box, front-loaded, and we're doing Nordic curls. I know there's been a ton of research on a lot of the Nordic curls in reducing injuries. I think it does reduce. I think clearly we've seen the same thing, that it does help reduce injuries. I also think from a strength perspective that you have to do more than just Nordic curls. But to me, from a lower body perspective, I think those are the main ones. I mean, I know the big question is, it's kind of Olympic lifting with soccer players, and probably if I was in a collegiate setting, we would definitely entertain more Olympic lifting with soccer players. With the different cultural mix of guys we get in here, I think by the time we would get a guy comfortable Olympic lifting, he might be gone out of our program. So we figured that we can get more bang from our buck by focusing on the lifts I just talked about, as well as some plyo type stuff. We've just started a series of plyo work where the first round, doing a little bit of a drop jump into action opposite jump technology onto a box and looking at contact times there, to get a judge of stiffness. Because again, we find if we're able to quantify stiffness of people dropping onto using opposite jump technology or onto a force plate or something like that, that we can actually see stability issues right there as well. So to me, plyos, as well as all those other lower body things are should be staples in all soccer players' training programs. Probably from the high school level and up.
I know you've done taken a unique route to get to where you are now, my man. And again, I applaud you for chasing your passion. And I want to ask you, everybody has their own path in this field to get to wherever their destination is, and who knows what we're going to be doing in the future for that matter. I mean, what's one big motivational message that you wouldn't mind sharing with that individuals that are interested in pursuing the youth model and then going to the college environment, and then even potentially going from a sport coach into the performance field? I mean, is there something that you could share there from a motivational aspect or an inspirational aspect that really helped you?
I mean, the biggest thing for me is, I find that there's actually now this group of soccer males, guys and girls, males and females, who played college soccer, that were going kind of the soccer route, in this huge need, because I just think culturally there's this huge divide between what's going on in a lot of kind of the S&C environment with especially the collegiate level, the collegiate soccer coaches. And granted, I think it's really improving now. You're seeing more guys and girls that played soccer that are getting into it, the strength conditioning field, and really bridging the gap. To me, what has concerned me is and it goes both ways. I mean, I've told this story before where I was about 4 years ago, before I started, 5 years ago, before I started my seminar series, where I was sitting at home, phone rang, Pac-12 strength coach had me on the phone and says, Dave, you got to talk to my soccer coach, man. He's just really struggling. He wants to take guys out of the weight room, doesn't want guys to lift. He's worried, that they're getting too big. But I mean, I need to train power. I mean, these guys, they're not strong. I've got to get them strong. We've got to be more powerful. We're trying to work on speed. We're trying to work on max velocity. And right when I feel like I'm making some good progress, he wants to pull them. And he was definitely right in the points that he made. And then about 5 days later, my phone rings, and it's the coach from the exact same Pac-12 school. Dave, you got to talk to my strength coach. They just don't get soccer players. I mean, they want this guy. They want to lift him. They want to get him big. All they want to do is be in the weight room. And he had his probably points that were also valid. And to me, it was a display to me that we're still not. There's too much miscommunication between the strength conditioning field and especially within soccer, the soccer field, and that a lot of soccer coaches can't truly understand the inherent advantages of spending time in the weight room. And at the same time, I think from the strength conditioning perspective, there's strength conditioning coaches that they look down upon the game of soccer. Well, these guys, I mean, they're weak. They don't like to lift. They're lazy. I can't get them to lift anything heavy. And I think we need to bridge that gap. And I think people that kind of have one foot in both realms can do that. So my passion has been, how do we turn on this group of guys that can actually do that and bridge the gap. And I think that is improving, and I'm really happy, to hopefully mentor as many of those type of people along the way to make that happen.
Well, Dave, I know you're a busy guy, and I appreciate you taking some time out of your day. Congrats on the win the other day, and
Thank you.
I'm obviously looking at it excited again for this year, man. It's great to see the success that you're having. It's great to hear that how happy it sounds like in your voice here, as far as the opportunity that you have been presented and the impact you're making, man. To be honest with you, it's cool to see the events that you're doing and the stuff you're doing on social media and the connecting, and you're really trying to help combine that field, getting people just to talk about soccer from an athletic development standpoint. I think we need to have better questions that help that sport in particular. If anybody had any questions about any conversations that we had here, any of the topics that we were talking about, or maybe they just want to find out more information about what you have going on, I mean, how could they go about reaching out to you, my man?
Well, I mean, clearly my story about the Pac-12 coach and strength conditioning coach, that's what drove me to create this sports science seminar type idea of how can we get, in that event where we'll hold it this year, June 9th to 11th in Seattle, and it's been such a cool event because you actually have top level NCAA strength conditioning coaches in the room with collegiate Division I head soccer coaches. So that to me, everything we talked about, those are all my aims of what we try to address in our June Sounders Sports Science week. It'll be midweek this week in Seattle. And for more information about that and kind of the stuff that we're looking at, I mean, you can look at me at Twitter. My Twitter name is just at Dave Tenney. And then we also have our own kind of sports science Twitter address, which is just at SSFCSPSCI, so for Sports Sci. And between those two on Twitter, it's probably the best place to kind of keep track of what we're up to and what we're doing. Anyone can reach me on Facebook as well. I'm at David Tenney. On Facebook, I'm there. We just try to be a part of this environment, just kind of sharing information, what's out there, and there's a lot of cool people across the whole world that are doing really good research, really good work, really good coaching, and we're just trying to connect them through those sources.
Well, again, Dave, man, I know you're a busy guy, and I appreciate you taking some time out of your day here to just chat and reconnect, my man. Hopefully this is a launching pad for us to do many more things down the road, and again, I compliment you for making a big-time impact, my man. I look forward to keeping in touch.
I appreciate it, man. Okay, thanks a lot. Thanks for having me, and keep up to the good work as well.